Listening today, you joined us today, know your show, they know Planet Critical. And having had so many special people on your podcast, both practitioners and scientists, and this whole variety of people that you've interviewed, it's evident that you must have such a wealth of knowledge and information, and would really would be so thankful for you to share this with us scientists. So anything especially tailored towards us scientists in terms of how to communicate the climate emergency, climate and ecological emergency, in terms of strategy. What are your thoughts um, on the moderate and what's the other word? The moderate
Radical.
and the radical. Thank you, radical flank. Um, so we just want to listen to you, and then from there build a conversation and also get all the input from the audience. Thanks so much, Rachel. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody sending messages in the chat. That's really lovely. Let me start with the moderate and radical flank thing, because I wrote a piece actually that went out on Monday about this very topic. Because a few weeks ago I was invited to speak to the private jet industry at a very private event for them. Um, and I was fairly, I mean, I would say realistic with regards to my diagnosis about ecological collapse and economic collapse, and very virulently disagreed with the WTO economist and the banker on stage with me, and was really surprised at to what point the members of the audience agreed with me. They weren't happy about it, but they still agreed with me. And afterwards, I was met with a lot of interest. I spent the day speaking with people. I was met with a lot of interest. And I was met with a lot of defeatism, the kind of defeatism that we see in the street. And I mean, these are people with a huge amount of resources, money, some influence, some have power, or certainly quite a few of them have access to power. And so I was really surprised to have these very similar conversations with them that I do with everybody else, essentially, those of us that don't have access to the halls of power. Um, and they were blaming the billionaires. Like there's always somebody that has more money and power than you. But they very much echoed the same sentiment of there is a system and there is nothing that we can do to stop this system's sort of almost organic self-perpetuation. Um, and I discovered about halfway through the day that one of the reasons that they were so keen to speak to me is that they had been spoken to by activists a couple of months before, 6 months previously, at a different industry. They'd organized a panel, and the activists had said, "You shouldn't exist. You serve no public good. We want to ban all private jets." The private jet industry said, "Here's why we think we serve a public good," and the activists went, "No, we still want to ban you." Now, you guys are all scientists, so you know exactly why private jets should be banned. Um, and on a scientific level, that is absolutely true. But on an emotional and human level, saying to people, we are going to take away your purpose, the thing that you value, the thing that you identify with, and not provide you with somewhere else to go, not provide you with what we call narrative, the golden gate of retreat. We are going to place the value judgment of your industry being bad for the planet on you then as being bad people because you're participating in it. It's a dangerous message because you're not going to get anyone that way. Now, in one sense, it was quite a helpful message because when I came along and said, I'm not going to say anything about your jets, I'm just going to tell you about economic collapse because I think that's something that you would all be really interested in. They were very amenable. They were very, very interested. They agreed. Carbon credits, bullshit. Of course, the jet industry isn't going to, sustainable jet fuel, bullshit. Like, of course, we can't go forever. Like they know, they just also feel that there's nothing that they can do. And I think that the more that I have done this work, the more that I'm coming to a place where morality is not actually the main talking point. Because most people are doing what they think is best. Now, it might be that their version of best is best for my family, best for my community, but they are not deliberately going around trying to make things worse for everyone else. And because the trickle-down impact of their best is worse for majority of people, it's quite hard to distinguish those facts. But not everybody that is a fossil fuel executive or a, lobbyist or whatever is an evil person. And I think it's actually really important. It's time we need to take the whole sense of evil out of the conversation. These people will keep doing what they are doing until they have the option to do something else. And then some of them might continue to do the thing that they want to do anyway, right? And then you can begin to get into a conversation of morality, what side of the future are you on? And also, are you aware that eventually you are going to be the minority? But I think a huge amount of people would do something else if they felt that there was an option. And if they felt that there was an option in which they could maintain whatever values they identify with. Because for some of them, it's really as simple as like I spoke to quite a few men at that conference and they were like, I just want to look after my kids. I just want to look after my kids. And they expect to be able to provide their children with relatively lavish lifestyles, you might say. But that is the value that they ascribe to. So I think until we start recognizing that whatever is driving the vast majority of people to make bad decisions is also the same intent that drives us to make the decisions that we do with regards to the battle to save our planet, our communication is not going to get very far.
So I hear what you're saying. Am I audible, by the way, now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. I hear what you're saying. I've said for a long time, people wake up in this world and say, how do I do evil today? And I understand the protectivist framework. And if we were in their positions, it's not about evil, it's about circumstances. We would be making probably a lot of those self-same decisions. But I think the message that needs is that protecting the planet is protecting your children, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't protect your children in a bunker or on Mars or whatever, like on this planet of despair and, whatever kinds of tribulations we're going to be facing that are sort of unimaginable at this point. Like we have some idea, but we don't know what the nexus and the concatenation of those things is going to look like and how bad it's going to be. So, I mean, do you have would you have a suggestion for how to disperse that messaging among them that, protecting everybody is how you protect your family? It's not enough because too many people out is not is dangerous as well.
I think the difficulty with that frame, and it's a frame I ascribe to, right? Nobody is safe unless everybody is safe. And no biological creature is safe unless all biological creatures are safe from these like big systemic impacts, essentially. But we come from a lineage of culture, of human culture, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years that says otherwise. That doesn't say you are safe if everyone is safe. That says you are safe if your in-group is safe. And to keep your in-group safe, you have to protect them from an out-group. There is an out-group. So like it's a huge amount of unwiring that we're asking people to do very quickly. And so, I mean, I'm a big believer in like, if the messaging isn't working, drop it and just try something else. I think talking to people about like, I don't know. Okay, so facts I only found out relatively recently. I'm sure everybody in this room knows it already, but the fact that out of all the continents, Europe is actually being the worst hit by climate change with regards to heating and impact. No, with regards to heating, it's warming more than the other continents, even though other continents might be experiencing, more droughts or wildfires or whatever. It's Europe that's really in danger of heating and is already heating. We might have to invite people in on a smaller scale initially, then you have to protect everyone in order for you to be safe. It might be speaking to people about the things that they cherish, like, you know, for Europeans, it's often Europe. I mean, God, do you guys remember when the bloody, what's it called? Notre Dame went up in flames and all the rich people all over the world lost their minds and started donating millions to recover it because it's like this cultural heritage. There's power in that. There is power in cultural heritage. So I'm very interested now when I speak to European people about like trying to make the focus about Europe, because if you can get people to expand, like it's like making that first expansion is actually the most difficult. So make that as small as possible, and then it gets easier and easier and easier. And I think also like walking away from the people that aren't willing to have those conversations. So I had a conversation with a fairly rich person relatively recently who believes that the population should be reduced to 3 billion people so that he can continue to enjoy his high resource lifestyle. And I went, that's fascistic. And he went, literally just shrugged. Like, yeah, I know, but that's what I want. That person is past the pale and is not where we should be focusing our efforts. So yeah, I suppose I'm sorry if I don't really have like specific messaging. There's a lot of people who are working on really cool narrative stuff that like actively test these things all the time. And I could platform one of those people for another Science is Rebellion talk. But I think the most important thing about messaging I have found in doing all of this work is remembering that the person that you are speaking to is human. And even if they're saying something so gross as to talk about reducing the population by 60% so that they can continue to enjoy their lavishness, there is actually a reason for it, even if you don't agree with the reason. So attempting to find that place of empathy, even for the worst among us, it's a skill that will carry us forward into building a new world that is one of liberation for all. But don't waste too much time trying either. Like Mr. Fascist, like I spoke to him for a couple of minutes and then I was like, nah, there's other people I can be focusing my time on.
Referencing, sorry, I switched headphones. Am I still audible?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Referencing the article that you just brought up, which is even the millionaires are fed up. When you talked about being at this conference, you had said that some people found what you had to say challenging and some people were extremely supportive. And you kind of end with making a case for collaboration, allyship with those people. And I was wondering how much of what you said to the audience that they felt accepting of, do you feel might have stuck with them? And I suppose this is kind of yeah, like, do you feel like that conversation is developing in those circles? Like,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, 100%. I would say the people that are slowest to pick up the reality of the situation are people in drafting policy. But I find that the private sector is sort of like well aware of what's going on, and government is well aware of what's going on, and the military is well aware of what's going on, and the public are well aware of what's going on. But it's the people that are actually drafting the policy within this set of rules that make this game in the world, that are the most stuck, because they have no room to go in any direction that they need to because they're so bound. And so I find that they're the people that sort of kid themselves the most. But yeah, the vast majority of people I spoke to at that conference were like, yeah, I agree with your analysis. Like up to about, well, some agree totally. I think the lowest percentage of agreement I got was like 80%. The people that disagreed on that last 20% were just hoping that it wouldn't happen in their lifetime. But yeah, people know. And so this is the thing, right? If you come from a place of thinking the person I'm speaking to knows what's going on, so again, there must be a reason as to why they like can't accept it or won't accept it or whatever, then I find that that's the most interesting sort of position to be in from a messaging or a communication space.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I,
Go ahead, Renata, please.
yeah, listening to you, Rachel, talking again about the conference with the rich people. You were saying that they would be happy. Well, they would accept a shift if they were given the opportunity. Did you get a sense of where they think that opportunity, like who's going to make that shift? Who's going to give them that opportunity? Where do they think that shift is going to come from? Who are they waiting for?
Yeah, who are they waiting for? That's such a good question. I mean, it was such an interesting exercise in cognitive dissonance because they spend their money on sustainable jet fuel and carbon credits, knowing that it's just bullshit, that it's just that's a way to sort of like protect the image, and they don't know how to reform the industry. They really don't. And I assume a lot of them think that it just cannot be reformed. But where else did those skills go? Those people sell private planes and big yachts, essentially, or they own them. Where can they take that skill set? All of the decades of experience that they have, we need to figure out with them where they could put that. Similarly, like I speak to people who manage wealth for really wealthy people, and a lot of them are like, if we had a place to put it, we would. But the problem is that we can't find something like actually sustainable. And so they take what's available to them, which is mostly a perpetuation of the same thing, because unless we actually actively start to challenge the values which are underpinning the system, then nothing's really going to change. I am meeting, I would say in the past few months, a couple of real change makers have come across my path. I spoke with, literally yesterday, I interviewed just before I got the call to come to Scotland. I interviewed Rebecca Adamson, who's an Indigenous economist, essentially. And she helped create a fund that is based on Indigenous economics, so like reciprocity and mutuality and giving back to the earth and all this kind of stuff. And there's now $1 billion in that fund. So that's like a real place that people can put their money that will actually be helpful to the rest of the world. And the architects in Denmark who created the reduction roadmap and are lobbying their government to reduce the building industry's output by 96% over the next decade, because that's the only way to keep in line with the science. So there are people who are figuring out how to do it. Admittedly, I don't think that an industry like the private jet industry is full of, you know, your sort of fringe green thinkers that are keen to figure out how to actually, you know, translate that into more of a public good. But I got the impression, put it this way, that quite a few people in those industries would be interested, very interested in having a conversation with somebody that could help them figure out how to translate it into or transform or shift the industry. Nobody's daft. Anybody that picks up a newspaper these days, unless it's like The Sun, people know what's going on.
But I mean, there are industries that they could be investing in, but because they're too much of a challenge to the sort of system and the steamroller of empire, right? They're not the ones that they're going to invest in. So, I mean, that's a different issue. It's like they want to invest in things that fit their systemic understanding and preference. And those are not the things that are going to save us. So that's a conversation that needs to be woven together, or like a bridge to be found, I think. I was curious about a lot, actually, about like your history and what brought you to journalism in the first place. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that And also, like, when climate sort of took center stage for you, like, was it a moment, or was it a gradual evolution? How did that come about?
Mm. Well, my first response is probably like climate isn't center stage for me, and it never has been. The big picture is center stage for me. I'm not good with numbers, or good with facts, if I'm totally honest. Um, so to me, what has always been most interesting is trying to find the seams, or like the web of a thing, how it fits together. But um, I there's a real version of the story, and then there's a sanitized version of the story. And because I'm tired, because I got 3 hours sleep, I'm thinking about giving the real version. Um,
Show up with your full humanity. It's safe here. I promise. It's welcome, but no pressure as well.
okay. I had a nervous breakdown essentially in 2019, 2020. And took that time in COVID to just sort of recover and bang my head against a wall and feel very confused about life. And wanted to launch the world's first sustainable publishing house. And didn't, but did launch a podcast because that had been some part of my marketing plan. Um, and it began very simply, like I just wanted an excuse to speak to interesting people about interesting things. And I wanted to learn more. Like I was voraciously sort of devouring books on economy and big idea books and all this kind of stuff. And I just wanted to get a sense of what was holding the world together. So I launched that podcast, and then through interviewing somebody, I got a gig as producer of Radio Free Sarawak, which is the only independent radio news show in Malaysia, or at least it was at the time. With the new government, I think things might have changed. And that was producing Indigenous news by Indigenous people for Indigenous people about the state of corruption between the logging industry and the politics and the royal family. And our journalists had to use fake names. They were dialing in from all over the country. Some of them were dialing in from the forest. And we were tracking how the total destruction of nature was destroying as well these communities' livelihoods, their culture, their capacity to survive. And also having a very serious impact on the local climate. So, with the 80% of the Bornean forests have been impacted by logging. So like the microclimate is getting increasingly unstable. There are more and more flash floods. There's soil erosion because of all of the logging, and with the fact that the trees are raised as well, and the flash floods, now wash away total villages. And the government at the time was letting them get away with it because they were in on it, pocketing the money. And so I was looking at those stories, and then I was also interviewing people about capitalism. And gradually it was like I was getting a kind of first-hand look at systems, like this corruption between politics, between industry, how it was impacting nature and people, and how the international community was ignoring it because they needed the resources coming out of Malaysia. And then I was doing this intellectual podcast on, the economy in it, and it just sort of came together. And I interviewed Steve Keen on the economics of climate change, and that was it. I rebranded to Planet Critical and decided that's what I want to look at. I want to look at the intersection of these main things. And it has just spawned ever since, essentially. And it's been an interesting road as a journalist because journalists, especially young journalists, are not encouraged to do big picture reporting or systemic reporting. You are not allowed to like join dots essentially in your reporting. And so I found that actually like running my own site was kind of one of the only ways that I could tell these stories because mainstream papers wouldn't touch them. And it was a big gamble, and it's paid off because obviously people want these stories because people intuitively feel it to be correct, that there is a global systemic issue that is about power and justice and corruption and nature. And we need to reveal it in order to figure out what to do about it.
I was wondering when you had mentioned, so like journalism to interviewer, was that a difficult shift? Because I know like it's a very different animal to be like live interviewing people, and sort of what's in your development and in that transition, what's one of the things that you found most useful for delivering the consistently good interviews that you do?
Oh God, just being curious. Sorry. I think I just have a sort of chatty, curious personality. You know that Liam Neeson thing, like I have a particular set of skills. It's actually true. Like I just have a particular set of skills. And I'm very fortunate. Like I am good at what I do. And I really enjoy what I do, and I'm very lucky for that. But if anybody's looking for interviewing tips, I mean, silence, right? I think the biggest thing that you can offer as an interviewer is silence in order for to give somebody space to think something through. And especially if you're interviewing like a baddie, they will often panic in the face of silence and say the thing that they don't want to say. And then also to take the time to really feel through your own question as an interviewer. People that listen to the show will know that I, often sort of leave big gaps of silence when I'm interviewing, and sometimes I have to even edit out even like bigger ones. I think there was once I sat and I just stared into space for about 4 minutes, because I could feel the thing, but it wasn't quite formed yet. Take your time.
Here, I
Go ahead,
just want to
Renata.
say, I just want to say that I think your interviews are so good, and I so enjoy them because you ask such clever questions.
Thank
I really
you.
do. Absolutely. I shouldn't have said that.
Thank you so much.
From the chat, we actually also have a question from Luke
Please.
O'Doherty. Well, it was not a question, but two quotes that you brought to mind by the author of Lean Logic, David Fleming and Raymond Williams, circa 1993. Large-scale problems do not require large-scale solutions. They require small-scale solutions within large-scale frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you agree with that based on like you had done that interview, with the amazing, Amy Westervelt, when you were talking about like local, was that, maybe it was a different interview, I'm conflating, but that you were talking about like the need for like local power building. And the other quote that you reminded me of was, there are ideas and ways of thinking with the seeds of life in them, and there are others, perhaps deep in our minds, with the seeds of a general death. Our measure of success in recognizing these kinds and in naming them, making possible their common recognition, may be literally the measure of our future.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. I think that thing about okay, I have two things to say. Number one, poetry like that will get us through. And the second is that the question of scale is so important. The biggest sort of hurdle that I see is people trying to figure out what to do globally. We don't need big global solutions. The global actions that we need are to take global decisions to stop certain things. So we need to massively ramp down the production of fossil fuels deeply and then stop it soon. We need to sign international treaties enshrining the rights of nature into law. We need to actually follow the UN Charter on children's rights and these kinds of things. But the rest, we need to actively empower communities to re-embed themselves, reroot themselves in their land, in their place, because they will know what they best need. And if you're trying to figure out what to do about a system that is so complicated and so large, if you're trying to think about how to roll out a global solution, you're gonna get caught, right? And every time those conferences come around, we all get really angry because they're not doing anything. But there's an element of like, also, what can they do? Like, what can these people do? Their economies are completely dependent on fossil fuels. to get off fossil fuels would be to totally crash their economies and would be to crash their power. And they live in a sort of like zero-sum game. So I don't think there is very much those people at those COP conferences can do, because there's very little that we can do on a global scale. So it has to be about facilitating the dynamic evolution of communities to come into relationship with the land around them, with each other, with nature, with a different set of values. And that is a way as well that we will create like a plural world that will be resilient in its cultural diversity, I think.
So when you were talking with Amy Westervelt, though, about like the Atlas Network and how these people are working on international corridors of power that are well traveled, like, does it not beg some sort of, even if it's an overarching affiliation between these localized communities, like, like act locally and organize sort of globally, but the actions that you're doing are within your own sort of corner of the universe, because it feels like it's with what they're doing with the legal system, with the accelerating decline of democracy, with, laws that get disseminated from like one nation to another to ban protests. They're so organized. And as you were saying in that interview, so intersectional, right, in the way they do things, that don't we need some sort of framework that, makes a constellation of our little individual points of light?
Yes, but I don't think that acting, it still doesn't mean that you roll out top-down solutions, though.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, that's not.
Like, so it's I like to think of it as like an ecosystem, right? It's a decentralized ecosystem of networks of communities and activists and knowledge gardeners and everybody figuring out what to do on this scale that they can is the most resilient thing to do. Because one of the reasons that we're all sort of like falling prey to fascism right now and authoritarianism, one of the reasons that they're able to erode our public institutions to the way that they are is because we have no fallback, right? People need to stay in their jobs because they need to pay their inflated mortgages, because that's the only way to have a roof over their heads. And they need to have money to put food on the table because they don't know how to feed themselves otherwise. And they are dependent on, these like massive private corporate structures and for their basic rights, like housing, like healthcare in the United States, like the internet all over the world, water. You are going to be able to resist the onset of fascism if you have somewhere to retreat to, essentially, if you have somewhere to insulate from. And so I think that as well is why thinking about like how do we protect democracy? Well, it begins with like protecting one another, essentially. We have to figure out a way to be less I mean, this is very Marxist, right? Means of production. We have to figure out a way to be less vulnerable to the whims of the ruling class, essentially, who themselves are only ever just bloody perpetuating the role that they were put, that they're only ever just perpetuating the function that their role demands, essentially.
And what's actually really beautiful to see is how mutual aid networks are popping up everywhere. And, I mean, from just local communities to like the Gaza encampments and how people immediately, like, it was astonishing to see people were redistributing excesses to places that didn't have it, and then offering things to the unhoused, and like that's the kind of society we could have if left to our own devices. And I think what's amazing for those kids on the college campuses, whatever people think or agree or don't agree, they have seen the rot in the system, and they've like punched through this reality in the system to see what's possible. And unlike the Occupy movement, when that also happened, we, after Occupy, still felt like we had a society to come back to, and then like, well, maybe I could make my way in it, or people went off and did amazing things, but there was a sense of time that there isn't now. It is mutual aid, do for ourselves, in like strike out independently and become resilient as a community, or horror. And so the stakes are higher, and I think the kids are amazingly all right, you know? I wish we had the kind of like eye-openedness that they do now, because what they're doing is really revolutionary. Um, Go ahead.
Just one thing on what the kids are doing. A huge part of that is because they have a commons where they can gather. Like they have a physical space that is the center of their life. It's the center of their emotional life, their intellectual life, their decision making, a campus. And it to me again is like emblematic of how how dangerous it is to live in a place where nothing belongs to the public. Like I was thinking about it with regards to the fact that all over the world, climate activists and the scientist rebellion protests take to the street in order to cause disruption. And it's because the street is the only place that we have left, right? That is public. But it's not about just causing disruption. It's about you have to cause disruption if there's no place that you can gather to create, essentially. And so the students on campus are emblematic of, I think, what would be really feasible to imagine most adults having with regards to this eye-openness or empathy or capacity for like rapid collaboration if we had a public space, a public square, essentially. And again, that's why the community thing is so important. There's a lot of questions coming in the chat. Should we take a couple?
Yeah, indeed. Is there one that strikes that you want to sift out first?
Oh, you scientists, you always use so many words.
They do, indeed.
Hard question. Okay, we talked about solutions.
There's there's one from Jules
Yeah,
that
go.
says, do you think the solution lays in educating people about the facts of how our current lifestyle influences climate change, environmental decline, etc., but also educating people about some solutions that could be implemented locally? And what do you think our role into this is as scientists? How would you suggest to generate these community bonds to promote awareness on their environment and local action?
Yeah, no, I don't think telling people that their lifestyle is having an impact on climate change is at all effective because you are asking people who feel totally fucking, excuse my French, but disempowered and ineffective and impotent to believe that they are causing a planetary crisis. But of course, that doesn't go in. So no, I don't think that's effective at all. I think what like the degrowth movement does well is offer policies of this is what the world could look like. So work less, more time with your friends and family, better food at a better price, housing for everyone, a green job guarantee. I think that is a better messaging right to go. This isn't a problem of education. This is a problem about the fact that people have nowhere else to step into. Even the people that want to leave exit, and there was nowhere for them to exit to. So a lot of interesting work going on at the moment with like mutual aid networks is just creating off ramps. Like we've got to ensure that this moves beyond intellectual discourse and into an embodied politic, I would say.
So what advice would you have for Scientist Rebellion in what we're doing and like what more we could be doing to support this? Like what's necessary?
Well, can I expand on that question because I was thinking of that as
Please.
well.
Yes, please.
How do you see Scientist Rebellion? How basically we're doing this because we're so desperate and we feel it's our duty, knowing what we know, we feel it's our duty to fight for life. And also in order not to go crazy, basically it's like a really good way of staying healthy in the mind. But how does it come across? How do you see our actions, our work, and maybe you've heard other people talk about it. It'd be great to have and get an evaluation from yourself.
I think like the rebellions of scientists and medical professionals are really, really important because you guys are seen as moderates, essentially. Like to be a scientist is kind of to be a bit moderate and a bit institutionalized, even. It's in a sense quite a conservative career path, and it's very respected. And so for those kinds of people to be sounding the alarm is more effective than kids out on the street sounding the alarm. It's very difficult to disagree with scientists rebelling. And so I think your actions are really, really, really important. I wonder if there is, and I'm just off the top of my head, I wonder if there is a way to kind of like distinguish the actions, the design of your actions, so that they are not as similar as like the more general Extinction Rebellion, to kind of play on that radical flank, moderate flank thing. Because that's really the between the wiggle room between the radical flank and the moderate flank is really where kind of like change happens, I think. But yeah, no, I think it's absolutely critical what you guys are doing. I suppose I would like to see in an ideal world. Okay, so Civic Square in Birmingham are is offering like a workshop now, a couple, and these like online and in-person courses in which people can learn about materials, like the kind of materials that you would need to like reinforce your community against climate change, and the skills that you would need in a collapsed economy. It's not prepping stuff, and it's all come like they've I spent I think about a couple of years putting these things together, and they're bound in science. And I think that's really fantastic. That's a place that you can point people to go to say, hey, go and do this. I'm working on a project at the moment with the David Graeber Institute where we are inviting global North institutions to redistribute some of their resources and knowledge by creating these projects with us in communities that are most vulnerable to climate change to go, how do we fortify these people and these ecosystems? So we're beginning in the Caribbean islands. We're going to get scientists and academics from the global North in to be like, right, what do we do? How do we help? What do we do just for these people, essentially? So yeah, I think that being a little bit more like, no, I don't know enough. What am I trying to say? In the same way that you have all crossed a professional boundary in some sense by engaging in activism, which is so important, I would encourage you to keep transgressing those professional boundaries and experiment out of your niches. Like whatever your niche is in, figure out how to apply it to a bigger part of the thing and just see what you can solve on a repeatable scale rather than a big scale. Does that make sense? Sorry, my brain is beginning to wind
I
down.
totally understand. And actually, I was going to suggest, both for our translator and for people in the audience, why don't we take like a 5-minute break? We can breathe, take a look at some of the questions, just because, yeah. So if you need to like go get a cup of tea, people, we'll be back in like 5 minutes. Is
Oh,
that
what
good?
time are we? I thought this was only going for an hour.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I think we can do 5 more minutes and that should be fine. Go ahead,
Well,
Renata. I think
what time were you planning on going on till?
we had it scheduled for 1/2 past. Some of that was going to be like a scientist rebellion talk at the end. But if you can't stay, and really, we're so grateful for you coming under these circumstances. I don't want to prevail upon you for that. So let's
That's very
just,
kind. I think if let's go for another like 5:10, and then yes, I'm sorry, I think I will have to get
no,
back.
not at all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Renata, you wanted to ask a question, I believe.
Yeah, Rachel. So I'm Austrian, but I've been living in Panama in the global south for the last 4 years now. So I'd really like to make this comment and ask you a question from the Global South. And I'm going to read it out because I'm not you. So, so I'm talking to you from Panama, where we recently went through a countrywide uprising and protest against open cast metal mining, right? Imposed by a government that is completely captured by this Canadian mining firm and whose contract violated the Panamanian constitution on no less than 25 accounts. This is the biggest copper mine in Central America, and it's needed to deliver the raw material for an energy transition that is set to keep the system that is killing us alive, destroying our most pristine ecosystems and the health of the surrounding populations. So for us in the Global South, whose destiny basically depends on the decisions of governments and people in the Global North, this is mostly about social justice and climate justice. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on this and what message you might have for us.
My thoughts on what exactly? Social justice?
On the situation of the Global South, because I realized that your podcast is mostly has mostly guests from the Global North, and it's mostly Global North oriented. So I'd just like to get like a message for the Global South, and taking into account that our situation here is very different. It's really about justice. It's we can't reduce much emissions here. It's not about emissions reductions, even though our governments, make us believe that that's what climate policy is about. Here, it's about justice.
I may be totally off base, but I guess I just don't see that division. I think it's also about justice for people in the Global North, who are also extracted from, and who's the United Kingdom is the most nature depleted country in it's the most developed nature depleted country. We are all suffering, some much more than others, don't get me wrong, but I think an important message with regards to like global cohesion is like it does actually all impact us in the same way, just on different scales, say, or levels of that. And I think it can only be about social justice. And Amy Westervelt said this in my interview with her, right? Like, you're never going to get millions of people out in the street for solar panels. It has to be about social justice. We have to get people linking up around the world. And also given the fact that wealth inequality between countries is actually decreasing, but wealth inequality within countries is increasing. So the middle classes of India, China are really growing at the moment. And also the fact that with regards to the Global South, they have the same problem that we do in the Global North, which is that there is a corrupted set of people in charge, perpetuating a series of bad decisions. That's the only way that like the Malaysian forest gets logged, right? It's because there are, Global North buyers, but it's because there's Malaysian elite willing to sell them off. So the imperialism and the neo-imperialism of the Global North is really, really terrifying. I'm terrified of it as a person who lives in the Global North, let alone somebody who lives in the Global South. But I actually think that the people who have contributed the least towards climate change are experiencing the worst of it now. And that is such a terrifying injustice. But unless we do something globally together, that injustice will continue up through the scales, all the way up to the people who think that they're untouchable, which they're not. And so often something I sort of say to like Global North audiences is that climate change is the first existential threat for us in a while, right? Maybe ever. But there are so many communities around the world that have been living in existential threat because of imperialism for centuries, if not millennia. And so I think we have a lot to learn from our brothers and sisters in the global south with regards to resilience and survival. And I think that we have to join up these movements so that that very intersectional, corrupted elite that just press the button to keep the machine going, so that we can find an exit route for them as well. I hope that answers your question.
I have one question that I feel like I don't know if it's going to be too much at the end of this sort of very thoughtful interview in the state and context that you're in. So I'm going to give you that question and an alternate, and you can take whichever one you feel like.
Okay.
Because I don't want you might have an easy answer to it. It's easy left. It might not be. So we've been seeing this unprecedented wave of like the global protests in reflexive and visceral opposition to the genocide being live streamed in Gaza. And we certainly have seemed to have crossed this threshold of a social tipping point in terms of people challenging the system and this steamroller of empire. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the fact that governments have been largely deaf to those cries and what that reveals about the world in which we live and the ramifications of that for any causes of basic justice that people are fighting for. Though we might have kind of already sort of answered some of this question, I was wondering if if that's an easy lift, or the other option is what gives you hope in the midst of all this?
Uh,
Is that the hard question?
yeah, right. I mean, the hope question is easy, right? People give me hope, and the resilience of nature, which we are, gives me hope, and art gives me hope, and yeah, I really love people. I know we make mistakes, but I really, really love people. And I see like so much energy gets put into keeping us down, because it's unnatural, and I don't use that word lightly. We are meant to be equal globally. It's so obviously our kind of like natural self-organization, and a lot of energy gets put into ensuring that doesn't happen. So I'm very hopeful, especially when their source of energy runs out or they don't have access to it, right? Fossil fuels. As for the cries of the people falling on deaf ears of the government, I think it's very unsurprising. As long as we live in economies of extraction that transform natural abundance into sovereign wealth in order to gain power over, in order to protect the in-group, we are always going to see colonization. And thus it is very obvious to me why these governments are ignoring their people's cries, because in the same way that their cries to get off fossil fuels are ignored, because these governments cannot the geopolitical world order depends on what is happening. It depends on violence. It depends on extraction. It depends on exploitation. It depends on murder. And so perhaps this really is a huge tipping point in which people realize not that it's one bad dictator, every half a century, or one rotten wing of the political system, but rather the entire political enterprise is founded on the desire to sequester power, and that none of us are safe as long as that is the drive. And so I have a huge amount of hope that, given how globally interconnected we are, and given this ecosystem of knowledge that generates, and given how fucking bad the situation is for people for your average person in the global north too, I really feel like we have a global majority for the first time ever And thus this could be the moment, if we are strategic with regards to the attempts at seizing in order to dismantle power, this could be the moment where things change.
Indeed. I think a lot of us feel that throughout lots of different movements. And I'm wondering, like, if sort of in as a final note, what is something that you feel is really important for people to know? I mean, I think you just said something that is very important for people to know, but is there something that wasn't asked, or is there something that you want to impart? Please, I would love for you to take a moment to do so.
Mm. Love. Just love. It is so difficult. It demands so much of us to love the person that we disagree with, especially when that ideological, political, or moral disagreement results in violence. It's not something I'm capable of, every day. But to see your work as an act of love, to infuse your work with love, to speak to people with love, because it is the only antidote to the poison of violence that infects this global system that we have. And violence cannot be contained, but it can eventually be undone. And I don't mean love in like, the woo-woo kind of way. I remember once sitting in with I remember once sitting in a meeting, and these white South Africans were saying that apartheid was overthrown by love. It's like, no. No, apartheid was not overthrown by love. Apartheid was overthrown by phenomenal political strategy and, the strategy of sabotage of private property and energy systems. But that can be a form of love, I think is what I'm trying to say. I do believe that we are going to have to up the ante with our activism. I believe that we're going to have to see acts of sabotage against certain infrastructures. And I think that to do so out of a deep, deep care for all that is living, like to dismantle what is death or death making or dying in order to care for all that is living, I think is a really important act of love. And it is the thing that will keep you going, I think. It's the thing that keeps me going. And it's the thing that keeps me soft even in the hardest of spaces. Again, not that I manage it every time, but it goes beyond, love goes beyond morality and love goes beyond ideology. When you are looking into the eyes of a loving person, it is very difficult it is, no, in fact, I would say it is impossible to dispute that, to dispute love when you see it. It's actually just a very difficult thing to argue with. And we need to get to a place where we are moving beyond debates, discussions, towards that which is incontrovertible. And to me, in my work, what is incontrovertible is the way that we are organized is a system of violence. and the way that we organize to respond to it has to be a system of love. And I'm just thinking of my grandmother through this wall, and for all, you know, she lived through, for all she knew, the thing that gave her a strength and a will that would have put even like Maggie Thatcher to shame was a softness, was a love. So I think that's what I would like to leave us with today.
Thank you. And all love to you for being here, for everything that you do, for being here in the midst of what you're going through. And yeah, just healing and resilience and love to everyone who loves your grandmother and to your grandmother as well. Thank you so much for your time and for showing up with your beautiful rawness and humanity. It's been a real privilege.
Thank you so much. It was such a privilege to be here with you. Thank you so much, everyone. I do apologize if you came hoping for some concrete strategy. I can't give you that today. Maybe on a different time in the future, I will be able to. But I'm so grateful to have had space with you to discuss these just really important things. And I hope it was of value in some way to everyone present. Thank you for being here with us.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thank you so much. Hugs to you.
Thank you.
And your grand.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna go and see her.
Tell
Love
her we said
to
hi
everyone.
and send our love. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, love. Oh, that was probably I need some emotional like transition time to start showing slides now. I'm gonna do my best. Everyone, please give me a moment because I'm dealing with multiple laptops and an open heart that is all over the room. So I am going to share screen. God, I want to have her back on as soon as possible. She's amazing. Okay, and let me take care of the spotlighting. So I think I can do it like, oh no, I have to be made a host. Okay, I can do that.
I just want to say in the meantime that apologies to all you people who, there's so many questions in the chat and we didn't have a chance to relay them all to Rachel, but we will get them to her at some later time. Maybe she'll be able to look at them and we'll give you her feedback. Thanks to you all for participating and actively participating through the chat.
Indeed, and thank you, Renata, for your sensitivity in addressing that. I'm so caught up with doing this that, yeah, I appreciate you addressing and holding that with care. So yeah, we'll share your questions. Okay, so I'm going to now share screen. And can I do that? I believe so. Yeah, I should. Okay. And here we are. So I've got 10,000 windows in my way. Here we are. And it starts here. So just to discuss a little bit about Scientist Rebellion and what it is we do and where we're at. So virtually all countries have agreed to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. In 1992. So obviously we've known about this for quite some time, and yet we haven't been doing what we need to do with it. So today's CO2 emissions are 60% higher than they were then. Year 2023, people are calling it a new normal. It's not a new normal. It's going to continue to get increasingly worse. And every year is going to set its own benchmarks. And we're frankly quite frightened of what's going to happen this summer. And And in 2022, the IPCC report said that any further delay in concerted anticipatory global action on adaptation mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. And we plan to produce more than twice as much fossil fuels by 2030 than would be compatible with 1.5. Many are arguing that 1.5 is done, that 2 is baked in even, and they're discussing more extreme temperatures beyond that. So this is a chart about trends in atmospheric CO2 versus global temperature change, and sort of these benchmarks of where we've had these discussions, and nothing has changed, because this isn't a problem of information or communication. This is a problem of power. So we need to be rethinking our role as scientists and just wider society, and engage with how social change happens. And that is why we've chosen to endorse mass civil disobedience, because this is our way of getting the message directly to the people. Scientist Rebellion is a global movement of scientists and academics. We believe in nonviolent civil disobedience. We're decentralized and horizontal. We have over 1,000 scientists in over 30 countries. And this is our email and our website. You can scan the QR code if you like. That is our Twitter address, and I will drop our donation link in the chat, because we also are dependent on donations, and we very much need your support, because we've got a lot of scientists facing court cases and other actions to organize for this very important year of action. So we have country level actions, but also internationally synchronized protests. If you'd be interested in joining us, that would be most welcome. And you don't have to be a scientist to join us. Like, scientists do take the performative role with and I don't mean performative in a bad way. Like, they are the ones that the cameras see in lab coats getting arrested. And that's really important and significant for, how that story gets told. But any skill that you might have as a non-scientist is needed and welcome. So please, if you like graphic design or video editing, or comms and media, like all of it, or you have a completely different idea, we would love to have you with us. Let me stop sharing screen, and I will share the donation link in the chat. Yes, 1.61 according to Copernicus, indeed. And I just want to thank you all for coming and for your time with us, because these talks don't mean anything if no one sees them. So very grateful for your time and your patience with everything. And again, apologies for not getting to all your questions. Here is our donation link, and please reach out to any of our social media channels or our Proton Mail, Scientist Rebellion Proton Mail, if you would like to join. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you again.